blah. Well, you know, that one question made incredible lie of that. So I think I think, you know, some new proprietors will help. I think some journalists have to fundamentally reinterpret what they think their job is. As one journalist said to me, well, Richard, the fact is the politician said it, and I reported the fact that he said it. I did report the facts. Well, no, think about it. That's fine. That's actually, in some sense, entirely true. But it's not the product we thought we were buying. Long answer to your question. The Australian Institute published a paper last week pointing out that most of the things that you read in the newspapers about economic modelling is just demonstrable nonsense. Like just fundamentally made up rubbish. But nice big brand of an authoritative economic modelling firm, you know, modelling results show 20,000 jobs will be lost. Last night's Lateline, hilarious example, I don't know if anyone saw it. Interview between two people worried about financial reform. The first grab out of the first guy's mouth was, if this reform goes ahead, it'll cost 35,000 jobs. And the journalist said, well, those numbers have been completely rebutted, haven't they? He said, well, that makes my point. No one knows exactly how many jobs are going to be lost. It's rare that a journalist even asks that question. You know, and Ross Gittins gave our article a great big run, and I couldn't believe how much interest in stating what I thought was pretty obvious it got. So my point is there are journalists out there that have no problem, or their editor has no problem with when someone comes and says, here's a claim, that as long as the claim will make the right group of people happy or sad, provoke some outrage, then give it a run. So to come back to your question, more proprietors, good. More distribution channels, maybe. Really, I think we need journalists and proprietors who think it's their job to ask hard questions, and for people to value, buy newspapers, give money to people that do that. Yeah.
I just had a question. You just kind of raised it really in your last response. You talked about sort of journalistic integrity, but then you kind of mentioned editorship, and I suspect that there's probably quite often a journalist does a story that I think is quite worthy, and it goes to the editor and the sub-editor and the deputy chief editor, and it gets cut down to one paragraph and it's buried on page 14.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's that as well, I suppose. Like, I can kind of see the point of what you're saying, but also the fact is that it's not entirely the journalistic institution as a whole that's sort of, but there's probably quite really valid, lots of journalists out there with a lot of integrity, but they're not getting the opportunity to express that.
Yeah, no, look, very, very good point. I mean, there's a difference between what a journalist writes and what the editor publishes. And you know, look, if you read multiple versions of the same newspaper, you'll see it was a big story in the early edition that no one read, and by the time people were buying it, you know, the story had been chopped quite substantially. Look, you know, here's the thing. What a newspaper editor is a choice filter. Of the million things we could tell you today, I'm going to tell you the 400 that I will tell you, and I'm going to prioritise them according to the size of the font and the placement on the page. But the job of the editor is, to some extent, say, wow, this journalist is passionate and boring, and that story is a dog and I'm not going to run it. That is actually the job of the editor. The question is the editor sitting there thinking, are my readers interested in this? You know, or will this offend someone on my board? You know, so I think it's inevitable that journalists will pitch stories to editors that their editor will say, yeah, not so much. You know, but there are multiple reasons for doing that, and in terms of there are good ones and there are bad ones. But you know, the reality is online there's space for everything. You know, so there are plenty of journalists who do get the small story on page 14, but the full story is actually there on the website. And for the subset of people that want to know more, they can actually read far more about it in the online version of the paper than the editor thinks is worthwhile putting in front of everyone. Now, we are going to have to wrap it up in a minute, so look, this hand's been up for a long time, so if I give a quick answer, maybe there'll be time for one more.
A couple of questions, points rather. The first one is, if you limit parliamentary terms, I don't think it would necessarily encourage members in their last term to start playing up because they're probably thinking ahead to it might jeopardise my chances of getting on the board of some quango or something later on. So, but the other thing is, I think a lot of what the media, including the broadsheets, do is like short-term sensational stuff, and the longer-term important issues tend to get put on the back burner. So you take the mining industry, a lot of the discussions about who's taking over who and where's this export going up and down and like things that are here today and gone tomorrow, but you see hardly anything on the sustainability of that sector. And yet even the two most abundant mineral resources, coal and iron ore, the horizon for them running out is now something like about 50 years, assuming we have a continued increase in production of those things. But this gets virtually no run-up.
Yeah, look, absolutely, and also I think journalists and editors are very worried about the thing that most readers probably want, and that's something new and interesting. So if everyone has written that the mining boom is great and will go on forever, it's really hard to get the first journalist to write, they're exaggerating this like crazy, and by the way, so there is a pack mentality in the media that makes it very hard, even for good journalists, to convince their editor to say something heretical. And so I take your point. I think the mining boom. We did a survey last year that showed that even though according to the ABS 2% of people work in mining, the average Australian thought it was 16%. They were 800% off, and you can only blame the media for that, because people's vision of the economy is not through a telescope, it's through what they see on television and what they read in the newspaper. And the $50 billion gas deal is usually a $1.2 billion per year gas deal over the next 40 years. But $50 billion is a bigger headline. Well, I tell you what, if they told you what Woolworth's annual sales were over the next 40 years, that'd be a bloody big number too. But who cares? So the mining industry have puffed themselves up quite nicely. They've puffed up the economic benefits. They've played down the environmental costs and the resource use costs, that's starting to turn around. Hopefully, in some small part because of what we've been doing at the institute. But it's a case in point, I suppose, that it's hard. Even though it's called the news, it's supposed to be new, it's a bit scary to print something that no one else has printed yet. A final point on the democracy stuff and the well-behaved stuff. The problem, again, newspapers, as you said, they like to sensationalise, they like the big crisis. Remember in the UK when they found all those outrageous politicians' rorts, people were getting their moats cleaned. Do you remember? Like, it was giant. I swear every journalist in the parliamentary press gallery was given the same task: find those rorts in Australia. The number of phone calls I had from people saying, "Oh, come on, mate, you must know something, come on, you must know something." Well, here's the story. The story is they searched and they searched and they searched and they found almost nothing. Where's the front page that says, "Gee, Australian politicians aren't that bad"? That's not a story. The story was a scandal, and that we looked and couldn't find it. Well, that's a fact. If an experiment, you look for something and can't find it, that's an interesting result. It suggests it's not there. Did they report that it wasn't there? No. Are they still looking? So how about we leave it on that note, and one again, a final plug. Sorry for this, but if you are in a position to love your think tank, please either fill out our little form and pop it in the box, or do it online, or just keep coming to our events. It's fantastic to see you all here at the beginning of the year. Again, we'll have Ian Fry in a month's time. Give us your email address, stick around and have a beer. Thank you very much for coming.